do that with Dr. Vicki Murray, who is here. And you're here because at the end of this week, we'll see the beginning of School Choice Week.
Yes, once again, every year at the last weekend in January is a week-long celebration of school choice. I'm going to be focusing today on private school choice. That's because Washington is actually one of the shrinking minority of states in the country that doesn't have a state level private school parental choice program. But school choice is more than just private schools. It's public school choice, whether it's being able to pick whatever district public schools you want, regardless of where you live. You can also pick from charter public schools, which are terrific and very innovative. There's also home education, and just the number and variety of educational choices parents have today compared to just 25 years ago is really exciting. But for this segment, I'm going to focus on private educational choices. And right now, there are over 80 programs in 34 states plus DC and Puerto Rico. And when I talk to people in Washington, they often say, oh, private school choice, that's a voucher, right? Educational choice is far more than vouchers. I know we go back to the time of Nobel prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, and he popularized the notion of vouchers, which are simply publicly funded scholarships for K-12, much like at the higher ed level, we have Pell Grants. They're similar to the GI Bill. Certainly in housing, we have vouchers. We have vouchers for food, SNAP, EBT. But in K-12, it's particularly controversial, although I never quite understood why, because we don't have the same level of controversy in post-secondary education or in other areas. However, educational choice at the K-12 level has gone way beyond vouchers. Right now, the most popular type of educational choice, private school and other choice, is educational savings accounts. There are currently 25 educational savings account or ESA programs across the country. Now, what are these programs? Think of it like this. Let's say for whatever reason, you opt not to send your child to the local public school. Well, the state then deposits some or all of the state and local funding into a dedicated account for that child. Parents get a dedicated use debit card where they can spend on any allowable education expense, not just private school tuition, but tutoring, special education therapies, transportation, testing fees, testing preparation, all sorts of things. And what we're finding is that parents are really tailoring the educational options that suit their children's needs best. And we're seeing another trend among ESAs now where they're not just funded with state and local appropriations. We're seeing a trend now, they're being funded by tax credit donations. So state taxpayers, whether they have a state income tax or a state business tax, they make donations to nonprofits that gather money for children's educational savings accounts, and those donors get a dollar for dollar or some proportion of a credit against their state tax liability. Now that's increasingly popular. Right now, there are 4 educational savings accounts programs that are funded that way. And I think that's a trend to watch because with appropriations, it's not always so stable. People want a more reliable, more stable way to finance educational options without getting caught in the vagaries of political whims. They want to make sure children's educational options are stable.
You brought up that the choice within the K through 12 is more controversial.
Yes.
But we're not sure why. Do you have any speculation? Because what I hear the most is that there's a fear, in this state particularly, because obviously I live here, but there's lots of other states have gone through this experiment, but I have heard from people, even some from those states, that their main concern was that if money went to these private schools or it followed the student, then it would be taken away from other public schools, and that those public schools would suffer unfairly because they wouldn't have the resources to teach kids. What do you say to that fear?
It's understandable, but here's where the logic fails. Think of it this way. If a public school no longer has a child enrolled, they are also relieved of the expense of educating that child. So no school should get funding for children they're not educating. The second thing is, what we've seen is people worry that, oh, if a public school loses a child or loses students at one point in time, it's game over. Things can never change. That's not what happens in the real world. What public schools do in response to competition from other types of education providers, and by the way, the competition takes the form of other public district schools, other public charter schools, homeschools, as we've seen from the COVID lockdowns. A lot of parents kept their children home and did not send them back, in addition to private schools. So what happens is public schools change the way they operate. They start listening to parents. That's what we've seen in states that enact choice programs, is for the first time, maybe ever, they're systematically listening to parents, what parents want, what students need, and they're doing things differently. They're also improving their overall performance without having to spend more money. So it's really freedom is a tide that lifts all boats. And this is something that I've really often thought is so strange. We allow 18-year-olds to use public dollars to pick whatever public, private, 2-year, 4-year program they want in a post-secondary world. Yet a few years later, when many of those 18-year-olds become parents themselves and have children who are, K-12 age, all of a sudden they're incapable of making decisions for their own children. So these sorts of arguments become very politicized, and they're not based on sound policy or empirical realities.
One of the interesting things that you've pointed out is Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reykdahl, has said he wants a down payment. And in years past, he's asked for much larger sums, and I'm sure he wants that again now, because the claim is this preposterous: if you're not spending the same percentage as you've always spent, more than 50%, that somehow you're shortchanging education. But we don't have to get into why that's preposterous at the moment. But he says he wants like a $10 million down payment, for a new spending. Or you can correct me on the exact number if you want. But the new federal tax credits proposed that the governor has to opt into for Washington kids to take advantage of. The amount of money that is being offered to Washington State, where taxpayers won't have, it will not cost taxpayers any extra money at all here. It won't cost the state extra money. It's a federal tax credit. That the potential of that fund dwarfs everything that Reykdahl is asking for right now. Why don't you explain how that works?
No, absolutely. What Superintendent Reykdahl has been asking for, he reiterated it during his State of Education address a little over a week ago, is that he wants $110 million from the legislature this session as a down payment for just basic education. Never mind that cost should be, there's plenty of money for education. In fact, the Seattle Times is just reporting that, enrollment is down again. However, let's compare that request to the possibility and just the conservative possibilities under the country's first ever federal tax credit scholarship program for K-12 educational expenses. First, what is this program? Essentially, this is how it would work. Every Washington taxpayer who has a federal tax liability can now make donations to nonprofit organizations that raise money for K-12 educational scholarships for children who attend either public schools or private schools. The title scholarship is a little unfortunate because it makes us think, oh, this is just for private schools. No, it's for public school students and private school students. So you make these donations. Well, what do Washington federal taxpayers get back? A dollar for dollar credit up to $1,700 for your donation. Now, this is not a deduction. Remember, a tax deduction is just a percentage of what you donate. So imagine your income is $101,700. Well, you make a $1,700 donation, and guess what? Your tax liability is now $100,000. So this is a very powerful incentive. And here's the good news. Because this was passed by Congress this summer, every one of us gets to take advantage of that tax credit, which is hugely important, particularly given where we seem to be going with a state income tax. Now, what could this possibly generate? How much money could this generate? Keep in mind, Superintendent Reykdahl wants $110 million. This program, conservatively, if just 30% of all Washington federal taxpayers gave $1,700 in a donation, that could generate $732 million. That is nearly an order of magnitude more than what the superintendent is asking for. Now, here's where it gets even better. Because this is already paid for with our federal tax dollars, there is no cost to the state and there's no cost to schools. So this is just a program that actually has the potential to bring funding to programs that are actually working. It helps us be in charge of our federal tax dollars. But what happens if the governor has to opt us into the program by January 1st of 2027? All he has to do is say, here are the list of nonprofits, and Washington is participating. Right now, 9 states have signaled that they will be participating, and it's not even the end of January yet. I suspect it'll be at least 30 states will decide to join this program, because here's why. Across the board, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, governors of both, across the political spectrum have said, this is a no-brainer. It costs us nothing. It brings in potentially hundreds of millions of dollars for education in our states every year. That's every year, by the way. Here's what happens if Governor Ferguson does not opt us in. That's $732 million. That's going to go out of state because we can make our donations to nonprofits that are located in any state in the country that has opted into this program. So, for example, like me, I would probably give, if Washington doesn't opt in, I'm going to make a donation to, I'm assuming my home state of Arizona will opt in, but I might go ahead and give to Mississippi because they've been doing such marvelous work. I'd like to support them. I could give to Idaho. We could give to so many different states. So this is a no-brainer. Let's keep all these resources here in Washington, benefiting Washington students and schools. And so the next time we hear from our elected officials, oh, there's just not enough money for education, maybe not. I don't know how convinced I am of that, but there could be a lot more. But Superintendent Reykdahl has actually come out against it. So is the Washington Education Association.
It's funny because they're saying, well, we desperately need more money, and they'll bring up things like tutoring or special education needs. And here's something that would provide that money at no cost to the state for parents to be able to find whatever special needs tutoring that they had or classes or, but they're opposed to it because it removes the control. The money's not controlled by them, therefore they don't want the money. It's kind of a sad situation, but maybe you can change it. Go to the Take Action page, go to washingtonpolicy.org, go to the top of the page. There's a green bar there at the very top where it says Take Action. You can click on that and get to our page. You can express yourself as many times as you want until January for this particular issue, but you can click on the education issue. There is follow the prompts there to give your information. When you give that information, the reason why it needs your address and your zip code is because that's how it finds out who your state representatives are and who your state senator is. And then you can change the messaging to reflect whatever your point of view is in that email. And then there's little arrows at the top where you can scroll through and go to your email to each individual. You can make it make your each email reflect your own voice. Then when you hit send, you've got it to everybody. All of you got the governor, your two state representatives, and your state senator, all in one click. You can send that message out, and you can do it more than once between now and the end of the year. Make sure it's marked on your homepage so you know when you want to send a message where to go. You go to the Take Action page at washingtonpolicy.org. Dr. Vicki Murray, thanks so much for being here, and at the what is it, the School Choice Week Eve, I guess is
Yes.
what we'll call it. Hopefully, we'll get some more choices here for Washington students and parents as well in our state. And I want to thank each of you for tuning in and watching, whether it's live, which is always appreciated. Tell your friends about it and enjoy your lunch hour with us, or on tape on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. If you saw something you enjoyed here and you want to share it on our YouTube channel, we very much appreciate that as well. And keep track of everything happening in this very busy and brief legislative session at washingtonpolicy.org. Scroll for the blog, and you'll find out the latest of what's going on. Subscribe to our newsletter so you won't miss a thing. And we'll see you next week here for another edition of Washington Policy on the Go. Thank you.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.